Hey, good morning, everybody. It is the Dev Talk Show on October 10th, 10/10 of 2025. Um, here with my co-host, Rich Ross. How are you doing?
Good, Chris. How's it going this morning?
Pretty good. It's a Friday morning, so that's always good.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yep. And today we are planning to dive back into a topic that we started talking about last time, which is the beginnings of creating a model context protocol server. But before you can do that, I, I, you need some data for the server to. I wonder. I don't want to say to use, but to.
No,
You need a context for it to serve. So
you need something to show. Yes.
yeah. So in that case, we're starting. We're going to start today seeing how SQL Server could be connected up to the data access, the data API builder, which
Yeah.
is a product that it is in Azure, but it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be because it's a fully open source project that you could host yourself. Um, and I think what we'll see is the idea is that it really doesn't take a whole lot of commands or setup to have a fully functioning REST API that accesses data in a data source. It doesn't have to be SQL Server, but there's several data sources supported.
Yep.
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 All right.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think because we started to get to this point last week, or not last week, 2 days ago, and there were a couple things right at the end where we thought we'd make the connection and it works. What I There were two things that happened. One of them was the connection string was pointing to a different SQL server, so that was part of it. Well, I said it basically the connection string was wrong because I typed something wrong in there. So that was one thing. So we got that. I got that fixed. And then the other one was I'm trying to remember because we talked about it in the chat afterwards. And let's see if I can refresh my memory real quick because um,
Yeah, I
it
don't
was a
remember what it was
really
either. It wasn't about the identities, right? I don't remember.
I don't think it was. Let me just check real quick. Two errors. One was the typo in the connection string. The second was the reference to the schema. So the entity source was different. So we should show both of those and kind of
Okay.
see what that looks like.
All right.
Um,
So I would say when you're ready.
yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. So there we are. See if I can read that font.
Can you read that? Okay.
It's a little small, I think. For
You
me.
want one more?
Yeah, maybe one more. Okay, cool. I know it's
Nice.
like when you stream, it's almost just slightly uncomfortably large fonts on
It
your.
is. It
Yeah.
is. I've got this 35 ultra wide monitor, and I've got a good 50% of it is this one little window, so it's quite large. Um, so let's see. So we started. So we've got this is just SQL Server connection, which we talked about. But one of the things, if I go back to, let's close up the runtime here for now, go back down to the entities here, and you can see that the product entity is the one that we were working on. Um, and that we had essentially a role in here of being anonymous, so we could just read the information. And I think when I originally had it, I had that, and it's just product. And yes, I guess it depends on the schema that I'm accessing SQL with, but the idea is that it's actually this part here
Oh,
that
okay, because it wasn't
I,
DBO, right?
exactly.
And I think in most SQL installations, the DBO schema is default.
It
Like
is.
if you don't do anything.
If you
Now,
don't do anything,
granted, I think that you could, but I wonder if anyone does change the default schema. So, so it was trying to reach out and access the product uh, table to make that to create an entity out of it, and it said, "Well, there is no DBO product."
right?
Okay.
Yep. And that's where I got a little lost, and it actually had trouble working. So we could go ahead and, well, actually, it is up and running. So I could do if I load a browser.
Yeah, so that dab start, you started it from the terminal in VS Code, it looks like.
Oh, yeah, inside the terminal in VS Code, uh, just because it's easier to do.
Hmm.
Let me go back to that, this one. So this here. So we're looking at that command and what I'm doing here because this structure. So instead of building from scratch like we were trying to do last week, I just figured we did some stuff before, or I did some stuff before. Let's just try and reuse that. So that's why some of the structure is a little bit different. So I actually have a folder in here where all my dab content is, and that is where that dab config file is. Let's see. So see here, we got that. So because I'm starting at the root, I just got to point to that configuration file with the parameter there. That's all. So once that's done, that's up and running. All that green stuff is good. It means it's running. And well, actually, if I go, let's do this. Let's cover that because you'll see here kind of where we are at posting diagnostics. If I go to this and say, hey, let's go ahead and do the API/product. Hopefully, there you go. Now it's a product, so it's got a lot of content in there. We can pretty it up with this little checkbox. Um, Zoom in a little bit, but you can see that we get essentially a record with all the product information, and then the binary. I believe that's binary. That is the thumbnail photo.
Okay. Yeah, might just be like base 64 or something, but I'm not sure.
Basically,
Anyways,
2.4. There you
doesn't
go.
matter.
Yep.
That's cool though. All right. So
It
yeah,
is pretty
you
neat,
there's
right?
quite a bit that you can configure here without having to write that same old CRUD based REST API over and
Yeah,
over.
exactly. So that's like, we just pointed to it, and all that was good. Now there is also, and we can talk about this a bit, but you can see the information that comes back. When you make the call, it actually gives you some information here on what the query was. So here's that select top 100, 101. That's kind of what ran behind the scenes. Um, cool. And so that's that. We got a table. We got permission. So right now I can only read it. So if I was trying to do some kind of a post and try and update that information, I'm not going to be able to do that. Might be something we take a look at as part of this, but right now that's not in the cards for what's currently on there. The other thing that's not in the cards for how we currently are accessing this is this entity here. Now, the only difference is that it points to a different component. This one points to customer. But the other thing that's really different is this here, which is the role. So we've got
Okay.
a role that is authenticated.
Right.
You're thinking,
No, it's good.
okay.
No, I was just watching. Yeah. So what you're saying here, if I can restate it, is that
Yeah, go for it.
to access this API, and
Hmm.
this is at the entire. I don't know if you can set this per. Yeah, it looks like you can set it per entity, perhaps. But
Yeah.
in order to access this, you have to be authenticated. This isn't just. We're not just going to see anybody pop in here and hit this endpoint and it's going to work.
Exactly. So if I was to go ahead and go back over to not that, this, go into this page, and instead of saying product, I say customer, I get the authentication check failed, right?
Okay. Right.
Which means I'm not, with the 403
Yep.
status and all that good stuff.
And in
So
the
it's basically,
browser, you just did a plain old, just a plain
I did
old,
a plain old
yeah.
get.
And this is something interesting too. When we said dab start,
Hmm.
DAB being the data access builder CLI that you installed as a .NET tool.
Yep.
And that's all in the QuickStart documentation, which is included in the show notes below. Of course, I just click save on that. So if you're watching absolutely live, sometimes YouTube updates that, sometimes it takes a second. But if you're watching in the future, then you're fine. So this is running locally right now.
This is all running locally, and that's a
Right.
good point,
Yeah. And I
except for the SQL
well, the
Server
SQL Server is
running on
not,
top.
but the
Yes.
data access API is. So it's very development friendly.
Hmm.
in terms that you can just get to work right on your machine. It works fine. And then I believe I don't know if we're going to see it today, but the DAB CLI even has everything you need to go ahead and publish this and have it start working in your Azure account.
I would
Um,
love to see that.
yeah, I mean, well,
I
I
think it
wasn't
needs
trying to
to be,
jump ahead if we don't get there, but the point is
well,
his. Here we go. You need authorization. So now my question is, where's that coming from? What's the authorization server or authorization endpoint that we're going to call to get a token?
it's a great question. So, just in case, can you come off my screen for 1 second?
Yeah, sure. That is done.
Uh,
And the reason I ask is because I think this is going to lead to my next statement that I just said that this was developer friendly.
mhm.
So that tells me, okay, there must be some configuration to say, what's my authentication server? And I'm wondering, I'm guessing that this is another thing that you can configure. Perhaps you're going to use an Azure service or maybe use Entra ID as yours,
Yep. For,
but I
yep,
I don't know that you have to. I wouldn't
you don't
think
have
that you
to.
have to. Right. Like if, let's say you're already bought into like Auth0 or you have your own OAuth2
Mhm.
server.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So we can talk through that capability here. So you can come back to my screen.
Okay. This is all in the data access the data API builder documentation, which I do have. My link goes to the overview section that you've got just touched. So the first link in YouTube will take you to overview. So you'll scroll down a little bit to get to security.
Yes, that's under the how-to section. There's a
Yeah.
security section,
Okay, great.
and it talks about using authorization with entity permissions, which is what we're essentially doing here. So you've got that, right now it's showing an anonymous one, which fine, that kind of works. You saw that works pretty cleanly, but you can also have an authenticated system role, and that's what we're going to essentially create. And you're right. In this case, I'm going to bind it to or use Entra ID as my identity provider. We don't have to, because you'll see the capability inside of there. And when we go back and look at the config file, it shows, it basically shows how you can point to a couple different authentication providers, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so this is here, user roles. Uh, so you could, um, and then you were asking a question, hey, does every entity get its own? Yes. But you could also within an entity. So in this case, we're looking at a book entity and the source being the books um, table. There's a number of permissions. There's an anonymous if you just want to read. There's also a separate authenticated read. Well, this one's a little complex, right? Because it's going to take, I think that's a use case where if you've got multiples there, it's going to take, I believe it's the one with the most permission, but I'm not positive. Users remember both anonymous and authenticated rules. Um, the user is a member of an anonymous role by default. Okay. If a user is authenticated, the user is a member of both anonymous and authenticated, right? So so that's the important thing here. So if somebody did not authenticate and they're anonymous, then they're only going to be part of the anonymous role. So they would only have access to
Hmm.
anything anonymous. So in
Yep.
this case here, they would have, essentially that's the role they get assigned,
Yep.
even though um, there's a separate one for read there, which is a little redundant, right? If I can read anonymous, why do I need to read authenticated? Especially when the users are a member of both anonymous and authenticated roles when they are authenticated. So I would have thought this would have said right if it was or change some other kind of action inside of there because now I'm authenticated. But either way,
So I think maybe in that case, they're saying authenticated is anyone authenticated. You just have to have been accepted with a token that this system understands. Do you think I'm right about that? But that
I do.
you can create more granular roles that must examine the token in some way, the access token. Perhaps there's a claim that's standard, or maybe that's even configurable as well. And you might have said it, and I just rolled right over it. But
Nope. I didn't say it yet, but there certainly is this, right? There's
yeah,
this role
right.
here, author. Like,
And
well,
in their example, they didn't like do anything there. But
Yeah,
I could see what you're saying is perhaps the example might hit home more if authors could read and write.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
And
Uh,
look, for all I know, I wonder if that's a bug in the docs. That might be interesting to bring up.
yeah.
I might bring it up to the team doing the docs.
Cool. Okay. So let's see. So when we think about permissions, there's a lot of great information here to read. I'm not going to go through it all, but the idea is that we've got authenticated and we've got anonymous. We've tested out the anonymous. So how do we show that somebody can be authenticated? So in this case, we're going to take a look at using some of the Azure components for authentication. You do get there's some support for identity provider when we think about static web apps. So that idea of we've deployed our application to a static web app where maybe we're connected to Cosmos DB or which has a that great integration already built in. It's using the fact that I'm here is using static web apps to uh, as my authentication mechanism. So it's almost like a managed identity. The static web app. Well, no, that would because you're not running inside of there anymore. Yeah,
Well,
so
yeah.
essentially if your application is running inside of a static web app, then and you're connected it to Cosmos DB, which is something you can do very easily, that is that's its own identity connection to say that you're authorized to get access to that. Or you can go the way that we're gonna go, which is, hey, we're gonna create a JOT token.
Yeah.
Um, since you can create a JOT token from any identity provider, then it opens it up for you to bring in that JOT token from whatever service you're using.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and that makes sense. That means it's as flexible as you need it to be, but at the same
Yeah.
time, they have deep integration with static web apps. So if that's a product that you want to use for your application, then even less for you to work on. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, and then so can't show you this because it's in the connection string, and I really don't want to expose that. But know that when we look here, or if you were looking at the connection string, I have a setting in there for authentication. And for authentication, I'm saying Azure Active, or sorry, Active Directory default. So what that means is going to use whatever credentials I'm using for my AZ login. So that'd be my credentials that I access the portal with, essentially, to be able to use that credential to then go ahead and be the authentication piece. Now, this is only the authentication between the DAB component and the SQL Server. Okay, it's not getting access to the DAB front end per se, right? We're saying this authentication here is for DAB to talk to that connection string, right? We think about where we're going. Let's say the browser when we did that piece here about the browser is your client in this case.
Hmm. Yeah.
This
Right.
client is going to talk to that endpoint,
Yep.
and right now that endpoint's running locally. And then once it talks to that endpoint, it is the connection string that then makes the call to
Yeah.
the database to make that connection. That's all.
Yeah.
There's a couple different places where you can quote unquote have an identity to access a resource.
Our data API builder has its own connection to the data source, but I, as the client, I need some access. It might be interesting to think about. At least I'm curious now, thinking about the security.
Hmm.
If the access token that is used by the caller to contact the web API, if there's a way to flow that through so that way you could set up a scenario where you're passing permissions along. If we think about, especially if you have a little bit of gray hair like me, and you think about the 3-tier n-tier architecture that was super popular and recommended literally a few decades ago now, what often happened in those setups is your web server would have a very powerful account to talk to the SQL server. So that
Hmm.
meant if somebody could trick the web server into making a powerful call, then you sort of lost the benefit of whatever their permissions were. Who cares? Because they've
Right.
somehow tricked your web server into acting on their behalf in a very powerful manner. Now that's, that's, I think there are probably plenty of sites out there today that still say, listen, the middleman service has, I'm not saying it has to have SA type privileges, but maybe they're
Mm.
still read and write, but I only intend for people to read. And those are things to contend with and to think about when you're setting it up. Is there's two
Yeah.
levels of security here. Is the SQL connection? I keep saying SQL, but we know that Data API Builder can access many different data sources. That
Yep.
connection, you want to think about the security there. You want to think about the security that of the caller just trying to access the API. That's all they're trying to do. So,
Yeah. Absolutely.
yep. All right.
Cool.
So we have that protocol. I'm sorry, we have that up and running, and it's up and running locally. Now,
Hmm.
you were able to make a product call. I guess. Um,
We did. Yeah, we did do the product call. It's
yeah.
the customer
Okay.
call right now that is blocking because it's
Right.
authenticated.
Yep. Okay.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's. Do you think we could do that? Would we use maybe like the HTTP support and VS Code to look at that, or? Yeah. Okay.
exactly,
Now,
exactly.
granted, if you could do all kinds of things. You could use your favorite tools, whether it's I'm at Postman's super
Postman.
popular. There's some others that have become every once in a while, and I can't remember the names now. I feel bad about it, but there are some people out there making videos saying I've got better than Postman. Uh, well, like that's YouTube, right? Of course.
Right.
And HTTP file support. This REST client in my opinion, made HTTP file support famous for uh, .NET based developers or Visual Studio Code based developers generally. Like this sort of woke the world up and said, "Oh, this is great." Um, but it's in Visual Studio IDE as well,
Yep.
and I wouldn't be
Yep.
surprised if it's in other tools. I have to admit, I just you know I can't keep up with them all. I'd like to.
I know.
I think it's fun to know what tools can do what, but
Yeah. Love to hear your comments about what you're using and what tools make
yeah,
that happen.
that's
So
right.
certainly do that. And so what I'm using here, and I've been kind of using this for, I mean, it's been my default for HTTP for at least a year and a half, if not 2 years at this point, because I've moved away from Postman. Um, and going down this path and starting to dive a little, we'll see some cool things that we're doing here with
Hmm.
this. But essentially, it's one of the very popular REST clients that are
Yep.
out there, and it certainly um, does a lot for what we're doing here. I will say that the REST client is part of it, so we can at least test it and do a post. And I actually have a file that we're going to look at. But I think what we need to also is talk a little bit about is um, I'm trying to think of the best way to walk into that. But the idea here is that um, this is a, I think that's fine. There's nothing really there. Okay. So we need to authenticate. And
Yep.
what I'm doing is I am authenticating um, with, trying to think of the right word to say here. So what I'm doing is I'm making a REST call to go ahead and authenticate. And the authentication that happens is this request here. That request is actually going to get saved into this variable called name. I don't know if you've seen this.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually I've used this myself to do exactly what you're saying, is create a flow in this in an HTTP document. And you know what? I've set it up pretty much the same way you have. Is at the very top, go grab a token, let's save it to a variable, and then we can reuse it later.
Yep.
I've done some stuff where I've pulled variable answers out of later calls, so that like maybe there's a flow call here, grab something from here, grab something from here.
Hmm.
It's pretty neat stuff, and you can even create like environments. It's the last I looked into it deeply, there were still some things that dedicated clients maybe were a little more powerful, but I know that this is being actively worked on, and so I haven't really looked in a few months to see what's been added. But anyways, yeah, I see this is a cool feature.
Yeah. And then we need to include, because we're doing a post, we need to include information here. And these are query variables that we are including in this. So we've got the grant type, we've got a resource, we've got a client ID and secret. All of those are stored in environment variables, so you won't see them here. But essentially, what it gives me is the ability to, inject them as we move along. Now, I've already recently, certainly within the last half hour, done a request here. So I should have a cached token that is still active. Because if I run this, it's going to show me the results, which is going to include the token right on the screen, which I don't want to do. Right.
Yeah.
So let's try this and see if we can get this to work. So what should happen is when I send the request,
Hmm.
so you can see here, we've got things that we didn't have before that we couldn't get from the other thing, which is all of the um, customer information. So now we have an authenticated way to access this data.
Okay. So product was open.
Yeah,
Customer. If you try to and you showed it in the browser, you try to access customer without using an auth token, it's out. Doesn't work.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see we've got all of this going here. So um,
So using the data access builder tool, and then editing that ant manifest. And so again, if you walk through the quick start yourself, which is in the links below, you'll see that the process is basically the dab init, which you can. I think you don't technically have to use dab init, but it sure makes your life easier because it creates the config file,
mhm,
and you can even supply it with the connection string, so it'll just put it right in there. And I think you can supply it with many other parameters too, so that it'll just set everything up in that manifest file, just how you want it, that config file. And then you can go into the config file, and that's how you can
right.
declare entities. I even think that I think I might have seen in documentation that you can declare entities. Yeah, you can declare an entity using dab. So let me see if I can get my screen up here because I can show this real quick. Switching over here. So the quick start is linked below, and it's the quick start to local SQL database. But you can see there are also quick starts for the Cosmos emulator, for PostgreSQL, for MySQL, for Azure SQL Database, for Azure Cosmos DB. There's multiple quick starts. And we were talking about using dab init, which we didn't show live today. This is going to create the config file, but at the same time, from out here at the CLI level, we could also say, here, add this entity called author. Here's the source. Oh, and look, they use the schema. Interesting. And then here are the permissions. Now, you don't have to do this because as you showed us, you went directly into the file and made some changes, which I don't think they necessarily talk about in this quick start, because the quick start basically walks you through doing this with Docker. So everything's local. You don't have to set up anything. It's just um, pull the SQL Server Docker image, add a very small table, and you're off and running. So, like when I say it should fail, that depends on if. So here's the thing about JWTs, which I actually just watched a video on. It's like it's not that it wasn't something I knew. It's just somebody made a nice 13-minute, very concise video about JWTs. I thought it was really cool. And
Hmm.
since JWTs have all the information they need and don't necessarily require the authenticating application to go to a server and verify them, revoking them is not a simple thing. In other words, it would be like if I gave you a key to a house. I I can't I can't get the key back from you magically. Like I can't make it stop working unless I go change the lock.
Right.
And so JWTs have that issue. Now I've certainly seen that there are many tactics that teams will use to try and revoke them. For example, if they want to revoke one, they might record it locally in a database, and then your application actually says, now look, I don't accept this token anymore for whatever reason.
Gotcha.
And usually it's to do something like change your role. Let's say you were an admin and I need to demote you, but
Mhm.
you still have 15 minutes to go and do a ton of damage, right?
Um, it is interesting. No, that's right. And when you think about what you're saying, right, because the token's there, it's already been got.
Yeah,
Um,
and the difference between JWTs and cookie authentication, which again is, and this is a broad brush, is that if the web server no longer cares about the cookie, your access is up, the jig is up for that. And since web
mhm.
servers hand out cookies, it's usually a natural extension to say, okay, this cookie is invalidated. We're not keeping it in our session storage anymore, whatever that is. But
Right.
JWTs are meant to be, it's not that they're self authenticating, it's that you can verify that it came from the source that it's supposed to, and so therefore without making a call back to that source. That's the key. So, but certainly there are all kinds of techniques that are used to try to defend those. There's the JWEs where you encrypt data inside the token. So we got entities created out of those tables, and that was the only configuration we gave. That was it.
That was it. Yeah. Well, from the rest of the, because we closed down the runtime, we didn't talk about this part.
Right.
So this is the part that lets us do the authentication piece that we just did.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. You declared an issuer. Okay. Got it.
yes.
That makes
So
sense.
yeah, we did a little bit of cores. Just I know it's open, shouldn't be open, but it's just test.
Yeah. Right.
When we move this up into Azure, we can be a little more specific, and then
Well, you're running
there's
it
the
all
environment
locally right
piece
now.
here.
So
What's that?
you're running it all locally right now. So,
Running it all locally, so we could define an environment, and
okay.
what that gives us when we look at this here is that we can actually set settings in, um, specifically for environment data configuration, and then those get merged together at runtime, depending on the environment you're in. Um, I know they're repeated here, but the idea was to, I was in the process of kind of moving things up and not being in development anymore. So, but then we also have this provider here. Now, I'm sure in the documentation, there are a number of different providers that we could bring in, but this would be the issuer and then the audience, because what we didn't talk about was that we did two app registrations. We did an app registration for the API itself, and then we have that API. Um, so essentially, an app registration for the DAB component, the API endpoint, and then we basically make that we set a scope on that. It's an empty scope. It's just basically the API slash the app ID that it's given, and then we create another app registration, and that registration has permissions to talk to that endpoint, and that's what the client winds up using. So what we authenticated with when we ran the REST call in that HTTP file was um, the app registration that not only authenticates and gets a token back, but that token includes an audience that points specifically to the the DAB API here, um, and its registration. And it's tough to it's tough to talk about it without showing it, but the idea is that those things are components that get registered in the portal,
Yep.
and those things are, again, not wanting to expose something I shouldn't,
Well,
so
you're
didn't
setting
want
them
to.
as environment variables. So
Well,
yeah,
we set the values as environment variables, yes,
right.
but
So the portal's one way. Um, I mean, there's lots of ways, right?
yeah,
But
yeah, I mean,
definitely, uh, probably not app settings JSON is what we is what we're saying is
yes,
don't
yeah,
necessarily
and
use
ideally,
those.
if I'm pretty sure in the recent update to the DAB component that they are doing. Got caching. I thought they also there's logging, log analytics. There you go. Key Vault support. So you're actually able to store them up in Key Vault and not have to um,
Hmm.
bring them down locally to your machine.
Yep.
So good stuff. Uh,
So it's interesting. The authentication part of the config file has
mm-hmm.
a concept of providers.
Yep.
One of them is apparently called static web apps. Just if you use that provider, then then it'll integrate with that. You use the Entra ID provider and then set the audience and issuer. Okay, that makes sense. Um, and the audience was it's the app registration ID.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm getting out of the documentation now. You may have said that, and then okay. So is there a difference between the login.microsoftonline.com endpoint and the sts.windows.net, or not really? I guess maybe it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm just looking at, because I noticed, if I remember correctly, in the HTTP file, you went and got the token from,
Login.
yeah. Okay. That's probably not that important. So we were talking about roles earlier. I don't know
Yeah,
if this
I
is
would.
something we could set up in a few minutes, or if you wanted to go do something else.
No, that's fine. I would say that information came from the app registration and looking at the endpoints in Entra
Yes.
for what it should be calling against.
Yeah, when you're in your app registration, you can click that little on point endpoints tab kind of on the right, and then they come out, and they're not entirely secret. I mean, because it depends on on how, if you consider your tenant ID secret, and it's like one of those things that's like, yeah, kind of, except that when somebody logs in, it's going to show it to you as, I think you're going to see it in the redirect URL anyway, but I'm not
Mhm.
positive about that. Um, so we were talking a little bit about roles, and what I found interesting, and I kind of had forgotten this, is that I was thinking is, okay, so you could be authenticated, but how do we know that you're an author? Or just in their example.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is that the data API builder requires you to authorize a it says data API builder requires the header x-ms-api-role, and it's showing it on this on well, anyways, to authorize requests using custom roles. The value of that role must match a role specified in the token. So I guess it's more, I guess you can't just simply um put the role in the token. You also have to include a header. And you know why I think that might be is to specify which one you want the data API builder to take advantage of. Because what if you have, I'm not sure why that is actually.
Well, so if you think about it, when you it goes back up to this statement here, I think,
Uh-huh.
if I understand where you're heading. This one. So when a client, sorry, not that authenticated system. There was this section where, oh, here we go. No,
Well, user roles, like it says non-system roles. It is in the user role section. So you were in the right spot, but then maybe a little bit, yeah, right there, user roles, where it says
okay,
for data API builder to evaluate a request in the context of a user role, two requirements must be met. The client app
yeah,
must supplied access token must include role claims. Okay, fine. Then the client app must include the HTTP header with requests and set the header's value as the role. And I can only think that that's maybe to narrow it down among multiple possible role answers.
yeah. Exactly. And so you could have, different roles, three, maybe three's not, um, it certainly shows that you can make more complex things there, but you might have, an admin role, an auditor role, right? All of those things that we might have as we start building out larger applications. And then that gives you the ability to say, well, you're coming in as this specific role and whatever permissions those provide.
Yeah. I mean, there's interesting things that you can do. We didn't set up field access.
We did not.
You can configure what fields return as well. I
Oh,
mean,
that's fun.
it's really pretty highly configurable in that you can even say what we talked about this the last time, what actions are available. Maybe
Hmm.
certain users can create an update and delete, but others can only read. Um, Maybe they can only read certain fields. And that I find very interesting because I have a lot of personal experience with being on teams writing APIs who then the requirement eventually comes along that, well, shouldn't a powerful caller get more information back? And so you start, this goes a little bit beyond the standard just allow headers that you might put on an ASP.NET Core controller or minimal API. You're starting to get to field level. And so it starts to get complex in your code.
Mhm.
And here is a system that just does it.
Right. Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Um, can, so we're kind of, I mean, happy to go whichever direction you want to go, but we got like 8 minutes left.
Right. Right.
Um,
I don't know how quickly we would be able to implement some things because especially when it comes to roles,
yeah,
you'd have to go add that to
to
your
the,
user.
so, yeah.
That might be interesting to see in action, maybe with multiple fake users.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think it would get done in a few minutes. So we have our data API. Maybe what we can do is, I don't know if there's documentation we can look at or think about next time, is that if we have a data API, is that the first of many steps, or is it we're almost there to start thinking about the model context protocol server?
Yeah. So maybe lining up for the next time, if you think about the API aspect, right? Having that API endpoint is one of those things that it, you're basically, supplying that data for the model context protocol server. And there's a couple ways that we can do that. One is we can go down the path of, file a new project, build the server ourselves, and then host that in a place where others can access it and use whatever kind of authentication that we need to access those resources, right? And we can kind of go through that. So that's kind of certainly a longer process. Another way is just to host the API through API management and flip the switch and say, make this an MCP endpoint,
Oh,
which is a little, it's not, there's certainly a RESTful endpoint there,
yeah.
but the idea is that the MCP um, protocol is so that an MCP client, which is typically an AI agent of some sort, has a common mechanism of talking to an MCP server, and they know how to communicate. Right? They understand they have the Swagger, the equivalent of the Swagger definition, so they know how to talk to each other. And all what API management gives you is the ability to basically flip that switch and say you can also have an MCP endpoint for that too.
So I
Because
didn't know that was a built into API management now.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, there's a
interesting.
couple places where that's starting to light up. API management is one. You can also do it in API Center. Also, if you build functions, which are essentially can be API endpoints, if they're triggered by an HTTP call, you can have MCP over there as well. So it's wherever your data is, MCP kind of unlocks that for agents to then be able to communicate with and use as part of whatever it is it's trying to solve uh, for the customer or the process that triggered that agent to go. So
Okay.
there is some cool stuff to show there, in which that's the, there's a little bit of things we needed to do to kind of put those things in place. Now, we can certainly behind the scenes move this up into Azure, and then when we come back again, let's talk about, well, what does that mean to hook all that up and get that working.
Yeah, I think there will definitely be a lot of people who are interested in the first option, which is okay, you're going to build an MCP server. But it's also interesting to know there are options now, and they make sense where they are. Like build it into functions, build it into API management to say, hey, let's remove that boilerplate as well. You've already built
Mhm.
a function and with an HTTP trigger. What more do you need?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's interesting. Okay,
Very cool.
so so today we got linked up with the Data API Builder and SQL Server, and we saw that you were able to use two different endpoints to access it. The endpoints that they were very CRUD-like RESTful endpoints where you're going directly to that entity name and you can just read right out of it. We didn't add any other permissions, so it might be interesting to see like create, update, and so on. But
Mhm.
in any case, we just got a couple minutes left here. So um, next time, which we think will be Monday, we'll try to move on those things, right?
Actually, I am
Oh,
in
that's right.
custom
You had said
Monday.
Monday. Yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot.
It's a busy week next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll get it scheduled next week. So we're getting a little bit better with the streaming tools, and I think we'll probably be able to start putting them scheduled in YouTube a little bit earlier. I hope, which
Yeah.
is something we always wanted to do. But today, the Twitch stream didn't start, which I think is interesting. So I may have to test that a little bit later. I usually like to test on a different channel, but I may have to test on this one just to see what's going on. So in any case, I suppose that's it. Everybody have a great Friday and a great weekend. And you too, Rich.
Thank you. You
And
too, Chris. Enjoy. Should be a fun one.
yeah, thanks for everything you showed us today. And for you watching, whether it's now or in the future, don't forget to, if you like the video, don't forget to give it a like and a subscribe. And we'll see you all. Everything is on youtube.com, youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And we will see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.